This revision video is about Simon Armitage's poem called The Manhunt. The first thing I'd suggest that you do, and I'd suggest that you do this with every poem that you look at, is to look at the title as a way into the poem. So The Manhunt has connotations of the military. It's about a search for maybe a wanted man, but in this case, it's on a more personal level, a wife's search for her husband, or the man that her husband once was. So give The Manhunt a read, first of all. I'd suggest that you had a copy of the poem with you when you're doing this revision video. And you can get a copy of the poem from the internet if you type in Armitage, The Manhunt text. The first question I'd suggest you think about when you are looking at any poem is simply about content. What is the poem about and what happens? The second question I'd advise you to think about is who is the speaker and what are they feeling? And finally, I'd recommend that you take a highlighter and you highlight any words and images that you think are going to be important if you were to write about this in an essay, for example. So it could be poetic devices, it could be words with more meaning under the surface, metaphors, any words that you think you could comment on and explain the meaning of. A little bit about this poem. This poem is the story of a man called Eddie Beddoes. He was a peacekeeper in Bosnia when there was a civil war in Yugoslavia. And he was both physically and mentally damaged by a war. So he was shot and terribly disfigured and injured. But he was also very mentally scarred by some of the horrific things that he experienced when he was over there. The Manhunt, the poem, was originally aired as part of a documentary, and it's from the voice of Eddie's wife, Laura. Eddie served as a peacekeeper in Bosnia, and he was discharged due to injury. He was actually shot, the bullets entered him, and it ricocheted around his body, grazing his heart and causing him lots of internal damage and terrible depression due to some of the awful things that he'd seen. The poem is about her getting her husband back, so to speak, and realising that their relationship has been damaged, that he has become an entirely different person, and that it's left a lot of scars on their relationship and scars on him, both physically and mentally. If you didn't know anything about the war in Bosnia, it took place in the early 1990s. It was a very vicious, bloody war. It was a civil war. The countries that you now know as Serbia, Croatia and Bosnia fought a brutal, murderous, often illegal war. And the term that you might be familiar with is ethnic cleansing. That's where this war is where that came from. The idea of wiping out an entire ethnicity. British soldiers were sent in as peacekeepers, but their position there was rather strange. They couldn't intervene in the war, so to speak. So very often they witnessed atrocities taking place, and they couldn't do anything about it. So you can understand why it might have left Eddie Beddoes so terribly scarred. Let's look at the poem in more detail. So it would help if you had a pen or a pencil and you were making some notes on your copy of the poem here, or making some notes on a piece of paper. I'm going to look at the first line, the first phase. The first phase is a military term. So if you think about it in terms of military strategy, it would be the first part of a military mission or procedure. But also it's the first kind of procedure. She's talking about the next step in their relationship. Now that she's got her husband back, she's sort of dealing with the next thing that she needs to do to try and find out who this new husband, so to speak, is. And you'll see Armitage mingles lots of words to do with the military and relationships throughout this poem. That's one of his main devices. Second line, after passionate nights and intimate days, only then would he let me trace the frozen river which ran through his face. So passionate nights and intimate days, we get the impression of this very close couple. And this frozen river, this metaphor that Armitage uses, is very powerful. Although she's tracing the frozen river, she's actually tracing the course that the bullet took through his body. And the metaphor, the frozen river, if you think about a frozen river, the ice on the surface, underneath that ice used to be a fast-moving, busy river full of life, but it's become frozen over. It's now hidden. And you could say that Eddie's mental state and the way that he's thinking is a little like that. His emotions have become frozen over. He's retreated into himself, and he's physically changed in the same way that frozen river has physically changed as well and become something new, something different. Only then would he let me explore the blown hinge of his lower jaw. Look at the word she uses here, explore. She's exploring him, trying to find out who he is. She's seeking something out. We don't know yet what. We find that out at the end of the poem. The blown hinge of his lower jaw. Look at this military language, hinge, phase, mingling together. And handle and hold the damaged porcelain collarbone. Porcelain's a very delicate material. So to describe his bones as porcelain shows how he's changed, become something physically different. Think about the words handle and hold, the way she treats his body with such care, with such sensitivity. She's having to be very, very careful here, almost as if she's worried that he will explode, so to speak, that he's going to erupt, that there's a sense of danger here with this new person. And mind and attend the fractured rudder of shoulder blade. Now, rudder is something that you get to steer on the back of a boat or to change direction. It's one of the little flaps that comes out at the back of an aeroplane. But look at these words, mind and attend. Again, words like handle and hold, mind and attend, which show the care which she's treating his body with. And finger and thumb, again, the parachute silk of his punctured lung. So parachute, again, more military terminology, but again, this word silk connected with porcelain, showing how delicate his body is and how much care she's having to take over it. Only then could I bind the struts and climb the rungs of his broken ribs. Bind the struts. She's trying to repair him. She's trying to pull him back together. Climb the rungs of his broken ribs. Rungs is what you get on a ladder. So she's trying to climb the ladder to him, to find something, but we don't know what yet. And I don't know whether she does either, really, or whether she'll ever find it. And feel the hurt. So she wants to experience what he's experienced. Maybe not experience exactly that, but at least to feel something of what he's feeling, of his grazed heart. Now, when the bullet entered his body, it did graze his heart, as I said earlier. So that is physically what happened to him. But in terms of their relationship, that's also what's happened there. Skirting along. So again, this delicate action. Carefully. There's a sense of sensitivity and caution about everything she's doing. Only then could I picture the scan, the fetus of metal beneath his chest, where the bullet had finally come to rest. Now look at this metaphor, the fetus of metal. Armitage said this word fetus, he used it because it was a shocking word, and it is. It's an unborn child. To describe that piece of metal, that bullet in him, as a fetus, think about the connotations of that. A fetus, a baby, is something that changes you. He's been changed beyond recognition. But it's also something that lives off you, that becomes what it is because of you. It's something that grows. It's something that's born. Perhaps he's saying that this thing is changing him, changing his identity. He's becoming something else. Look how he says that the bullet comes to rest in his chest. Again, that lots of rhyme there as well. That's a strange thing to say. doesn't stop in his chest, it comes to rest as if it's there permanently. So he's permanently damaged. Then I widened the search, traced the scarring back to its source. And this is where we get to the climax of the poem, where she really finds what she's been looking for. We see this metaphor to a sweating, unexploded mine buried deep in his mind. This idea that this deep trauma that he's been hiding. But look what he does with this trauma. Around which every nerve in his body had tightened and closed. He's protecting himself, maybe protecting her, everyone else, from this mental trauma which he's hiding. Then and only then did I come close. Note, she says, I came close. She doesn't discover what it is. She doesn't get to the heart, to the crux of what the matter is with her husband. She only comes close. So there's a lack of intimacy maybe there at the end of that poem. And just one final note that I'd like to leave you on. This is what Simon Armitage said about the poem. Never having been to the front line, turning the words, phrases and experiences of these soldiers into verse has been the closest I've ever come to writing real war poetry, and as close as I ever want to get. Have a think about what poems the Manhunt connects to. Think about how he presents love, commitment, relationships, but also how love can be damaged, how love can be imperfect, how war can damage people, how war can damage relationships.